My Amish husband cheated with my sister for 12 years. Everyone knew except me. I found my sister's hairpin under my bed on a Thursday. I know it was Thursday because the bread was cooling on the rack, and I always baked on Thursdays. It was one of those plain black pins, the kind every woman in our community wore, but this one had a tiny bend near the tip where she'd pried it open once to pick a splinter from her thumb. I knew that bend. I'd watched her do it at the kitchen table when we were girls, and it was sitting there in the dust beneath the bed frame, on his side, caught in a crack between two floorboards like it had been hiding. The room smelled like pine soap and lamp oil and something else, something sweet, like the rose water she kept in a little brown bottle on her dresser. I picked it up and my fingers went cold, not nervous cold, dead cold, like the blood just left. And the thing is, I didn't say anything. I put it in my apron pocket, and I went back to the bread, and I checked the bottoms of each loaf the way Mama taught me, tapping to hear if they sounded hollow. They sounded hollow. Everything sounded hollow. I think I was 29, no, 30. I'd just turned 30 because there was leftover cake in the icebox, and I stood there tapping bread, and I knew. I didn't know everything yet, but my body knew. My body had known for years. I just finally held the proof in my pocket, small and bent and warm from my hand, and I couldn't breathe. I was 30 years old, and I had 6 children, and I couldn't breathe. Quick pause. My name is Sarah, and this is Rebecca Amish Home. If these stories stay with you, if they make you feel less alone, subscribe. It's free, and it's the reason I can keep telling them. Tell me in the comments. Was there a moment you found something small that broke everything open? And if you want to go further, a super chat or a membership, that's you telling me these voices are worth hearing. That keeps Terhis going. Now, back to what happened. Where I come from, a wife's job is to be a mirror, not a person, a mirror. You reflect your husband's goodness back to the community. If he looks righteous, you've done your work. If something is wrong in the home, it's because you weren't reflecting well enough. Nobody ever sat me down and said those words. They didn't have to. I learned it the way you learn to flinch, by watching what happened to women who didn't. There was a woman 3 farms over, Ruth Ann, who told the bishop her husband had struck her across the mouth during supper. I was maybe 11 when I heard about it. The bishop came to their home, and he prayed with her husband, and then he prayed with her. And when he left, the only thing that changed was that Ruth Ann stopped coming to Quilting Circle for a while. When she came back, she had a gap where her left canine used to be, and she smiled with her lips pressed together from then on. Nobody talked about it, but every girl in our district saw that closed-lip smile, and we understood. You carry it. Whatever it is, you carry it quietly, and God sees your faithfulness. That's the thing nobody tells you. The silence isn't just silence. It's a lesson plan, and it goes deeper than the big things. It's in the way you learn to read a room without ever looking up from your plate. I remember being maybe 14, sitting at the long table during a church dinner, and I watched my mother's hands. She was passing a dish of pickled beets to my father, and their fingers touched, and she pulled back so fast she nearly dropped the bowl. Just the tiniest flinch, and I saw my aunt see it, and my aunt looked down at her own plate. And that was a whole conversation, a whole world of something wrong, and not a single word was spoken. I almost asked Mama about it that night. I was standing behind her while she unpinned her hair, and the words were right there on my tongue, and then she turned around and her face looked so tired. Not sad tired. the kind of tired that goes all the way down to the bones, and I swallowed it. I just said goodnight. But you learn. You learn that questions are weight, and women in our community are already carrying enough. So you stop asking. You stop even forming the questions in your mind. And by the time you're older enough to marry, you've forgotten you ever had them. I met Eli when I was 17. He was 23. No, 24. I always get that wrong. He had a quiet way about him, the kind of quiet that people mistook for depth. And maybe it was depth. I don't know. He'd help his mother carry water without being asked. He'd fix a fence post on a neighbour's property and never mention it. When he looked at me during singings, he didn't stare the way some boys did, like they were appraising a horse. He looked, and then he looked away, and his ears turned red. I loved that. I thought that shyness meant safety. My sister Leah was 2 years younger, 15 when Eli started courting me. She had this way of laughing. She'd throw her head back, and you could see every tooth, which was almost scandalous for us. She was brighter than me, quicker. She could do mental arithmetic faster than our teacher, and she once memorized an entire chapter of scripture in an afternoon just because someone told her she couldn't. I adored her. I need you to understand that. Whatever comes next, I adored her. Eli and I married in November, the year I turned 18. Mama had pulled me aside 3 weeks before the wedding. She sat me on the edge of her bed, the one with the blue and white quilt she'd been stitching since before I was born, and she said, "Be patient with him. Be still, it'll get easier." That was everything. 13 words. That was my entire preparation for sharing a bed with a man. She didn't tell me what it was. She didn't tell me what my body would do or feel or need. She handed me a nightgown she'd sewn. Long sleeves, high collar, white cotton, so thick you could barely feel a hand through it, and she kissed my forehead. And I think she thought she was doing enough. I think she gave me everything she'd been given, which was almost nothing, and she thought that was the whole of what existed. Eli got even less. His father shook his hand on the morning of the wedding and said, "Be good to her." That was it. 2 kids playing house with real consequences, and the adults they just let us walk into it blind. The room was small. I remember that most. The bedroom in our first house, Eli's uncle's old place, had one window that faced the barn, and the curtain was a flour sack cloth with tiny blue flowers that had faded almost to white. There was a kerosene lamp on the dresser, and it threw this orange light that made everything look softer than it was. The bed was iron-framed, and it creaked when you sat on it, and I remember thinking the whole house could hear. It was cold, November cold, the kind where your breath doesn't quite show, but your skin tightens everywhere. I was wearing the nightgown Mama made, and I was sitting on the edge of the bed with my hands in my lap, and my feet didn't touch the floor. I remember that. My feet just hung there, and Eli came in, and he closed the door so carefully, like if he was gentle enough with the door, it would make everything else gentle too. He looked like a boy. That's the thing nobody tells you. He looked terrified. He sat beside me, and the bed creaked, and neither of us laughed, even though it was almost funny. His hands were on his knees. My hands were in my lap. We were maybe 4 inches apart. I could smell the soap he'd used, lye soap, the kind his mother made with lard and ash, and underneath it, just him. "Hay and sweat and something warm," he said. Is this?" And he didn't finish. I said, "It's okay." I don't know why I said that. I didn't know if it was okay. I didn't know what it was. But those were the words that came out because I'd been taught that my job was to make things easier for him. He reached over and his hand was shaking. I could feel the tremor through the mattress before he even touched me, and I thought, oh, he doesn't know either. That should have been a comfort. It wasn't. What happened next? I'm not going to give you details that aren't mine to give, but I'll tell you what I felt. I felt his hands and they were trying to be careful and they didn't know how. I felt my body do something I didn't understand. Tense up, lock, go rigid from my shoulders to my ankles like a board. And I pressed my tongue against the roof of my mouth so hard I tasted copper. And I thought, this is what Mama meant by be still. This is the it that gets easier. I wanted to pull away, and I wanted to move closer, and I wanted to cry, and I wanted to be good, all at the same time. It was over fast. He rolled onto his side and he said, "Did I hurt you?" And I said, "No." And that was my first lie as a married woman. Not a big lie, not a cruel one, just the automatic kind, the kind the silence teaches you. He fell asleep with his hand on my arm, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, where a water stain looked like a bent tree, and I listened to the wind outside, and I thought, is that all? Is that everything? Is this what the rest of my life is? The next morning, I made coffee and eggs, and he sat across from me and we didn't talk about it. Not that morning. Not the next week. Not ever. And that's the thing nobody tells you. The silence doesn't just live around the event. It moves in, it furnishes the room. It becomes the relationship. Neither of us understood that what happened between us could be different, that it could be something I participated in rather than endured, that my body had its own responses, its own capacity, its own. I didn't even have the word. Pleasure. I didn't know that word applied to me. I knew it existed for men because the boys talked. Even in our community, they talked. But for women, no one ever said. And Eli, he wasn't trying to hurt me. That's what makes it worse. He was doing exactly what he thought he was supposed to do. We were two people following instructions that didn't exist, in a language nobody taught us, and calling it marriage. And here's the fact that still makes my chest tight when I say it out loud. I was married for 12 years before I learned that a woman's body could feel something other than obligation in a marriage bed. 12 years, 6 children, and the whole time Eli was going to Leah. I don't know when it started, not exactly. I've pieced it together since, and I think it was within the first year. I think he went looking for something. And she was there, and she was bright and she laughed with all her teeth, and maybe she made him feel like less of a failure. I don't know, but the whole community knew. My mother knew, his mother knew, the women at Quilting Circle knew, and nobody said a word to me. Because that's how the silence works. It doesn't just protect the people who do. Wrong. It protects itself. If someone had told me the truth in that first year, everything would have been different. I could have left. I could have demanded he stop. I don't know what I could have done, but I would have had a choice. And they took that from me. 12 years of choices, gone, and I carried that. So I carried it. That's what you do. You find the hairpin, and you put it in your pocket, and you go on making bread. I developed this thing. I don't even know what to call it, this system. I'd count. When Eli was late coming home from Leah's farm, which was supposed to be about fixing her fence or helping with her husband Jonas's barn. Oh, I didn't mention that, did I? Leah was married too. She married Jonas when she was 17, and he was a quiet man, even quieter than Eli, the kind of man who could sit in a room for an hour and you'd forget he was there. I think he knew too. I think everyone knew. But I'd count. I'd count the slats in the kitchen chair. I'd count the stitches in whatever I was mending. I'd count the seconds between my children's breaths when they slept. Counting kept me in my body when my mind wanted to float away somewhere. And at night, when Eli came home, smelling like cold air and something I couldn't name, something that wasn't lye soap, something sweeter, like that rose water, I'd lie very still and count the water-stained branches on the ceiling. 47. I counted them so many times I could draw them from memory. That was my Bible. 47 branches on a water stain and the sound of my own breathing. You find the strangest shelters when the whole house is a storm. The quilting circle was where I almost broke. Every other Tuesday 8 women in Martha Yoder's front room, and we'd stitch, and we'd talk about nothing and everything at once. There's this thing that happens with Amish women. The hands are busy, so the mouth gets brave. One afternoon, maybe 3 years into my marriage, a woman named Fanny, she was older, maybe 45, with hands that looked like they'd been carved from oak. She said something while threading her needle. She said, "Some men have restless feet. That's all, 5 words." And she didn't look up. But every woman in that circle went quiet, and I felt sorry. Give me a second. I felt something shift, like the air got thinner, and I looked around, and I saw Mary King's jaw tighten, and I saw Ruth Ann, the same Ruth Ann with the missing tooth, press her lips together, and I understood that Fanny wasn't talking about feet. And I almost said it. I almost said, "Is it Eli? Do you all know about Eli?" But Martha started talking about the pattern for the border, and the moment closed like a door, and I sat there with my needle and my square of blue, fabric, and I stitched and stitched and stitched until my fingers cramped. Fanny came to me later that day. She found me by the water pump, and she put her hand on my arm, her rough, dry hand, and she said, "You're stronger than you think, girl." 7 words, and then she walked away, and I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to grab her arm and say, "Then tell me, if you know, tell me. Don't make me be strong, make me informed." But I didn't, because that's not what we do, and I know now that Fanny had her own version of my story. Her husband, Amos, had carried on with a widow 2 districts over for nearly 20 years. Fanny knew. Everyone knew. She raised her 7 children, and she made her quilts, and she never once said his name and her sin out loud in the same sentence. By our 5th year, I'd stopped looking for proof. I'd stopped checking his collar for long hairs that weren't mine. I didn't need to. The proof was in the way Leah couldn't meet my eyes at family dinners. The proof was in the way Mama changed the subject every time I mentioned Eli being gone. The proof was everywhere, like wallpaper. You stop seeing it because it's on every wall. The word I learned was betrayal trauma. I found it in a book. I'd left the community by then. That's its own story. One I'm not ready to tell all the way through yet, and I was living in a small apartment with peeling yellow paint above a laundromat in a town I won't name. My youngest was 4. I was working at a grocery store, and one of the other cashiers, a woman named Diane with short red hair and a laugh like a screen door banging, she gave me a book. She just left it on the break room table with a sticky note that said, "For you." I opened it on a Tuesday night after the kids were asleep, and I read a paragraph that described exactly what I had lived. The secrecy, the community's complicity, the way your own mind protects you by not letting you see what everyone else can see. And my hands started shaking. Not a little tremor. Shaking like I was cold, except I wasn't cold. I was sitting on the floor of my kitchen, the apartment kitchen, the one with the cracked linoleum and the fluorescent light that buzzed. And I was shaking, and I couldn't stop. The book called it Betrayal Trauma. 2 words, and those 2 were held 12 years of my life. I wasn't angry. I want to be honest about that because people expect you to be angry, and maybe I should have been, but I was just sad. Devastatingly, bone-deep sad, because I kept thinking about the girl. That girl on the edge of the bed with her feet not touching the floor. The one in the white nightgown. The one who said it's okay when she didn't know if it was. I thought about her, and I thought she never had a chance. Nobody gave her the words. Nobody gave her the map. She walked into that marriage blind, and she stayed blind for 12 years while her husband and her sister, and that's the thing nobody tells you. It wasn't just Eli who betrayed me. It was every person who knew and chose the silence over me. My mother, his mother, the women at Quilting Circle. The bishop, who I later learned had counselled Eli to resist temptation, and then never followed up. They all chose the system. They all chose the quiet, and I carried that. I carry it still. What I grieved most wasn't the affair. I know that sounds strange, but the affair was almost. It was the symptom. What I grieved was the possibility that my marriage could have been something real, that my body could have been mine, that Eli and I could have learned together, could have talked, could have been honest. If someone, anyone, had given us language, had given us permission to be human with each other, maybe he wouldn't have gone looking. Maybe I wouldn't have spent 12 years counting ceiling stains. I tried to explain this to Diane once, over coffee at the diner near the store, and she stared at me and she said, "But you could have just asked him." And I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry, because she couldn't understand that where I come from, just asking is like saying just fly. The muscles don't exist. They were never built. You can't use what was never grown. And that's the loneliest part. Being between 2 worlds, where one hurt you and the other can't fathom how. But here's what I need to say, and I need to say it carefully because it's true and complicated, and I won't pretend it isn't. I miss it. Parts of it. I miss the sound of a horse on a gravel road at dawn, that specific rhythm, the clop and crunch that meant my father was heading to the far field. I miss bread from a wood-fired oven, not the taste exactly, but the smell, the way it filled the whole house and made the walls feel closer in a good way. Like the house was holding you. Miss my grandmother's hands during evening prayer, the way her fingers laced together and her knuckles were so swollen from work that they looked like knots in a rope, and how she'd squeeze my hand once at the end. Just once, and that single squeeze held more love than any words I've heard since. I miss the stars. You can't see stars like that anywhere else. No electricity for miles and the sky it opened, like God showing off. I am homesick for a place that hurt me. I love people who chose silence over me. And I hold both of those things in my hands every single day, and neither one cancels the other out. That's what healing looks like, I think. Not choosing. Holding. What happened to me was silence dressed up as devotion. That's the most honest sentence I know how to say. But beauty and harm can live in the same house. I'm proof of that. I'm not building a life that rejects everything I came from. I'm building one that chooses. I choose the bread. I choose the stars. I choose the hand squeeze. I leave the silence. I leave the complicity. I leave the rule that says a woman's pain is less important than a community's comfort. And some days that choosing feels like freedom, and some days it feels like standing in an open field with no fence in any direction, and not knowing which way to walk. But I'm walking. I bake bread on Thursdays still. I do it in an electric oven now, and it doesn't taste the same, and I don't care. It's mine. If you grew up somewhere your own knowing was treated like a threat. If you lived in a house where everyone could see what was happening except you, and that was by design, I see you. If you're still inside and something in this story made your stomach drop, I see you. If you left, and you're sitting in an apartment somewhere trying to explain your life to people who look at you like you're describing another planet, I see you. If you're married right now and you just realized that the ache you've been carrying has a name, I see you. If you recognized yourself 3 minutes ago and your hands are shaking the way mine did on that kitchen floor, you are not broken. You were kept from the truth. That's not the same thing. Surviving that is not small. Surviving that is everything. Wherever you are in this, I see you. And you are not alone. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you felt listening to this. Tell me if there was a moment that made you catch your breath, or a sentence that sounded like your own life. Because every time you share, someone else reading those comments feels less invisible. There is so much more I haven't said yet. I'm just getting started. There are stories I haven't been brave enough to tell, but I'm getting closer. If you want to be here when I do, subscribe to Rebecca Amish Home and to the members and Super Chat family. You're the reason the next story gets told. If you want to be part of that, the door is always open. Your silence was never your fault. Start there.